Okay, I would like to welcome you all in this panel organized by Digital Markets Competition Forum. And I'm Ioana Kostandou, I'm the panel chair, and I'm very happy today to be joined with four great researchers, the panelists that we invited to discuss about digital platforms and the underlying technologies, which sometimes when we focus a lot on the economic consequences of digital platforms, they tend to be undermined. So today we will focus and try to figure out how algorithms and data, which are part of the underlying technology, shape economic behavior of the participants in the platform and therefore have impact on the competition within the platform. Our panelists are four, as I mentioned before: Panos Konstantinidis from Alliance Manchester Business School, Jose Paramoiano from Copenhagen Business School, Marta Stelmanska from Portland State University, and Christina Laimo from Lewis University in Rome. And I'm really happy and excited for the panel. After their presentations, we will have a Q&A session where actually you can ask by unmuting yourself following the order of your questions. And I hope that we will have a nice and interactive discussion. So without further delay, let's start with Panos.
Thank you, Ioana, and welcome to everyone who's attending live and to those of you who are watching a recorded version of this. So I'll get right into it. Let me share my screen. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how ad networks leverage data to create and capture value, and then move on to how recent moves, especially Apple's app tracking transparency policy, has impacted value creation and capture in these ad networks, and what are the implications for digital platform competition. So I think we all know that Facebook has grown its advertising revenue considerably since 2017. And this has, to a large extent, is due to what they call app event optimization ad campaigns. And we should say here that the primary beneficiaries of these campaigns are small and medium-sized businesses that wouldn't have access to the type of sophisticated algorithms that Meta uses in targeting different customers, right? So they depend on Facebook for targeting their customers. And just to give a sense of what app event optimization looks like, and this is from an older video presentation from Facebook, that talks about different types of events, including long video watch, clicks, likes, comments. And you can see how, for example, a hide gets a -100 point to indicate that the content that was shown to the user is not relevant and therefore has the lowest value, right? And these value points are what are used as inputs into an expected value calculation against the probability that there's going to be a follow-up on the event, including installation of apps or even app purchases. And this is from a blog that I follow almost religiously. Eric Schufert was a great expert on this. So basically how it works is that Facebook identifies users that have performed some kind of event and then tries to search for similar types of users that would fit the same profile in completing the same event, and then starts sending ad traffics to those users. So Facebook then tries to identify commonalities amongst the users that have completed the event and those that do not, and then tries to target ads to more users, right? This is known, I think, to most of us. And then advertisers would pay or bid to pay for an ad campaign based on the value calculations that I described just now. And again, this is not news. I think we all know that Facebook has been growing in ad revenue shares worldwide. And you see the graph here. And this is largely attributed to app event optimization. Now, what's interesting is, and again, this is not news. Last year, Apple introduced the App Tracking Transparency Framework. And according to this framework, developers need to collect an explicit opt-in, right, from users before accessing their unique identifiers, which would allow them to then do all the tracking that I mentioned in relation to different events. So these are no longer available to developers unless users opt in. And so how it used to work is that based on those identifiers, an advertising network would aggregate in-app events to user profiles and ultimately build a device graph, right? Which is essentially the profile of a specific device based on the different events that a user completes. And as I note here, how it used to work, this is very user-centric, right? So what Apple is introducing instead is what they call the SCAD network, which essentially is campaign-centric. So what they are doing is they are allowing the collection of data, they're allowing ad campaigns to take place, but because of the privacy-centric way in which the data is collected, app attribution data is very limited, right? And in-app event data is very limited at a campaign-centric level. So what that means is that the ad network would know that an ad campaign has some activity, but they wouldn't know which user is doing that activity, right? So they would only know on the campaign level. So again, no news. I'm sure many of you have seen this. There has been a lot of reaction to this. A lot of groups have reacted and filed complaints. And as I mentioned earlier, the ones that are mostly hurt by this change are the small and medium-sized advertisers and app developers whose ad campaign revenues now begin to drop, right? Because of the inability to track the user, to access the user identifiers and track users on the basis of app events. So what are the implications of this? And Joanna, this is my last slide, I promise. So obviously, AT&T, so app tracking transparency, is a competitive strategy, right? There's no denying that, even if they are doing so in the name of privacy. So what Apple is trying to do is they are trying to recenter content discovery and distribution within the App Store and away from ad networks like Facebook. Now, what's interesting is that in preventing this, what they are doing is that they are pushing for more within platform concentration or within platform advertising to take place. So some examples that I have here, so Shopify, Shop Pay, and we all know that Shopify is not acting as a marketplace like Amazon Marketplace does. Rather, what Shopify does provides the infrastructure upon which merchants can reach out to customers, and there's no two-way communication, right? So they don't commodify their merchants, and that's their core competency, right? They don't want to become another Amazon Marketplace. Now with Shop Pay, what they're doing is they are starting to collect that data and monetize their own ad services. And we see that also happening with video game platforms. Again, I'm sure you've heard recent announcements by Sony and Microsoft and how they are bringing in ad services within their own platform. So we're moving from, collection of user data to first-party ad services away from what we used to have, which is user data, to third-party ad services and monetization. So Facebook and Google distributing data across different services. And obviously what this is doing is more mergers and acquisitions and more market concentration. So more platforms are now, the big tech players are concentrating power, right? And I just wanted to comment on Twitter. I couldn't resist because this happened a couple of days ago. Twitter going private is interesting, and some say that, well, this is going to be very difficult, and a lot of users are going to leave. They're going to drop out of Twitter exactly because Elon Musk said that that he's going to allow more free speech, less content moderation, which is not what advertisers want to hear, right? But at the same time, Twitter is being bought with a huge debt, and what that means is that they're going to I think they're going to amplify their advertising on the basis of within platform advertising, as I mentioned, exactly because they want to cover their debt. There's no other way around it, because Twitter makes 90% of their revenue from advertising. So maybe in the near future, that's what we're going to see. I don't know what's going to happen after that. But obviously what this is creating is a huge debate between more privacy, right, versus more market concentration. And I think all the things that we've seen in the last couple of years, all in the name of privacy. Google has always also said that they've developed a new Android with privacy in mind. But all of this, I think, is adding more market concentration to the big players. So it's actually creating the opposite effect and moving some of the innovation opportunities away from small and medium-sized businesses. So I think we are in the process of seeing this, competition actually dropping more market concentration, all in the name of privacy. I'll shut up here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Panos. I cannot stop myself from asking you a quick question. It seems that what you are saying with these very interesting examples is that somehow the competition of the platforms against their participants is becoming more intense, right? But I was wondering what is happening with competition among the different participants, among these different players, and maybe in case of Apple, what do you think that this new policy will create for these participants within the app developers, for example?
Well, I think Apple is an interesting case. Again, this is, I think we would all agree that Apple has consistently tried to concentrate and integrate more tools and services within their platform, prohibiting open source, prohibiting open interfaces, and so on. Everything is proprietary, from language tools to development tools to APIs. Everything is proprietary, and there's a reason behind that. I mean, they are doing so in the name of improving user experience, but obviously, and some of their users would love that, right? Because they want a seamless service. They don't want to care about shifting services and trying to implement tools that don't interoperate, and so on. They want to make everything interoperable. So it's good news for native app developers, but bad news for developers that are writing apps or developing apps for multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. And this is actually something that on a paper that we're working with Carmelo and Alexi, we're trying to analyze this move towards more integration that only benefits Apple native developers.
Okay, thank you very much, Panos. Let's continue with Hossein. We'll be back later on with the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and thank you very much, Panos, for indeed very interesting starting of this panel. I would like to continue and maybe building upon what you just said, Panos, but maybe on a little more abstract way, although I will try to, of course, bring examples and have touch points with the real world to make everything more tangible on this Wednesday afternoon for us. So the basic idea that I would like to speak about is the one that states that data has somehow become a factor of production in this digital economy. A factor of production, just like capital or labor, right? A factor of production that is required for many companies in order to generate the products and services, to generate the value that they are meant to generate, right? An example would be Facebook or Instagram that we have been hearing about. Now, the fact that data has become a factor of production forces us to automatically think, okay, if data is a factor of production, then we should expect data markets to emerge, because factors of production goes to markets in order to be efficiently allocated. And this brings us to this question: where are data markets? What are data markets? There are many definitions about them, and one could even argue that Facebook, Instagram, this kind of platforms are in a sense data markets in the way that they capitalize on data in order to monetize it and make it available, right? However, they are not proper data markets where an entrepreneur can go and say, okay, I would like to buy 10 terabytes of this data in order to have my startup product delivered, right? It is difficult to compete with LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just because they are the gatekeepers. They are the owners of the data, which definitely underpins this market concentration that Panos was referring before, right? So what we have, data becoming a factor of production, platforms that have become very big owners of data, and a lack of an efficient market, an efficient mechanism to have this data flow in the economy and foster competition. As a consequence of this, the market concentration that Panos was referring. And now we can ask ourselves the next question, which is, okay, if we would like to achieve this efficiency, if we would like to have data markets, why don't we establish them? And the very nature of data, understood as a factor of production, somehow hinders the establishment of data markets. And this is because of two reasons. The first one is that data is non-exclusive in its use, in the sense that data can be used by different companies at the very same time in order to produce. And this makes data pricing extremely difficult. It's very difficult to find the price of data. Auctions don't work. One-to-one negotiations would be inefficient, and this somehow hinders the establishment of data markets. And the second one is privacy. Because my data is private, I don't want my data to be flowing around in a sort of market such that once I sell it, I somehow lose the control about it, and I don't know who owns or sees my data anymore. Now, what this represents is a challenge for the economy, because we have an asset, a factor of production that is extremely valuable, that if widely used through or widely efficiently allocated through a data market, could help firms and economies to thrive and to reach the next level in terms of value creation. But because of the very nature that data has, we cannot work with data markets. Now, facing this challenge, facing this problem, IT, digitalization, entrepreneurs, scholars, etc., are coming up with alternatives to reach the same effect, the same outcome that data markets would have, but acknowledging those attributes that make data so difficult to trade in a market. And what they are coming up with is the so-called data exchanges. Data exchanges are kind of associations in the more centralized way, or smart contracts, decentralized peer-to-peer smart contracts that somehow gather data from different users. And instead of selling the data itself, what they sell is insights about those data. Let's go to the healthcare sector, where data exchanges are flourishing recently. Let's assume that there are two hospitals that own each of them some data about their patients, right? And each hospital would like to use this data in order to train algorithms, diagnosis algorithms, for example. Now, the data that one hospital has is not enough to reach the necessary efficiency of the algorithm, the necessary accuracy of an algorithm to properly work. Now, one hospital cannot work with the data of the other hospital because privacy would be violated. What data exchanges are making is to enable the algorithm that needs to be trained on the data of the second hospital to flow directly, to travel directly to the second hospital, be trained there, and go back to the original, let's say, first hospital that now, after paying a particular fee, has increased the efficiency of the algorithm, therefore use data in an efficient way, as if it would have bought the data in a market, but without seeing it. This type of data exchanges, from which we see several examples, for example, DOWEX, Ocean, DSpark, Data Republic, Comombo, those are data exchanges that are already working and that different firms can interact with. And the interesting part, or one interesting part about these data exchanges, is that they are built on the notion of federated learning, the notion that someone owns the algorithm, which is the intelligence, and this algorithm flies in a privacy-preserving manner to all those repositories where the data is. We saw an example here with the hospital, but if we go back to the more social network or platform idea, we could multiply or amplify the notion of federated learning and say, okay, it is possible that in the future, or this is definitely today technically possible, that algorithms are trained locally on the mobile phones of each user or participant of a platform, social network, and travels back with the little increase in efficiency to whoever is owning the algorithm. And now you can ask yourself, okay, maybe this is interesting. What does it have to do with platform competition? And there are two elements or two dimensions that we can analyze in order to answer this question. The first one is that the ones that currently, as of today, hold the largest data sets, the largest amount of data of this new factor of production in the economy are platforms. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. They are the biggest holders of this factor of production. Now, assuming that data exchanges will at some point emerge and become widely adopted, platforms, the existing ones, need to think and develop strategies in order to determine how they're going to relate to data exchanges. Are they going to oppose data exchanges? Or are they going to try to become data exchanges? What is Elon Musk, following on Panos' temptation to refer to Twitter's acquisition? What is he going to do? Is he going to stick to the traditional model where the platform somehow capitalizes on the data, even if according to some regulation, the data belongs to the users? Or is he going to launch some kind of federated approach and not only underpin or foster what his definition of free speech, but also underpin and foster the definition of free data ownership, monetization, and efficiency in a market? If I could have 2 minutes with Elon Musk, I would love to ask him this question. So this is one dimension of competition there. And the second one is competition between the participants of the platform itself, right? If I'm a Facebook user and there is 1 billion of other Facebook users, I will eventually be competing in this federated learning data exchange approach in monetizing my data better than my neighbor. Now, there's an interesting twist here, which is that data, in order to be valuable, needs to be very large. I mean, the volume of data that you need in order to generate insights, to train those algorithms and reach high levels of efficiency that I was discussing before, you really need a lot of data. Meaning that I myself alone, I cannot compete in that market because I have no power, no leverage. If I try to compete with Google or go to the hospital and say, okay, instead of giving you access to my data or using my data to train your algorithm, I require 20 euros or 200 kronas instead of 10, then probably this hospital is going to find a neighbor of mine or another patient that is going to be willing to, somehow sell the access for less price. Now, but because we need a very large volume of data, what we are starting to see are data cooperatives, which, making an analogy with the factor of production idea, is to data what labor unions are to labor, a sort of syndication of the factor of production to enable some kind of cooperation negotiation, collaboration with the holders of the other factor of production. And this is basically what I wanted to say today. As you see, more questions than answers, but hopefully interesting questions that motivate an interesting discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you very much. I think what you introduced is a very interesting topic with these data exchanges. I couldn't help myself by wondering whether these data exchanges are more appropriate for non-social media data, but for different type of data where somehow there is a ground for collaboration among parties and a ground for exchange. Because I'm still wondering whether it makes sense, for example, for a social media platform like Facebook or Twitter to share their data, and whether they will win something using this model instead of what they're currently doing. Any just brief reflections on that?
It's a very good question for which honestly I don't have a direct answer, right? But I would like to think a little bit following on the question. Say, okay, who is the owner of the data? The owner of some data that Facebook is using is me, myself, right? So Facebook can somehow help me monetize that data, and I would be happy to pay Facebook a fee if it helps me to somehow get into this data exchange economy. Mark Zuckerberg said a year ago, Meta, and now we don't cease to read articles in the newspaper about firms going to the metaverse and buying things that they don't even know what they are. So these CEOs, these decision makers, they definitely have an impact in the way that the economy evolves and moves very fast, right? So if he one day would say, Zuckerberg, for example, okay, we are going to become or to enable data exchange, and we are going to empower our users to make more with their data, marketing, for example, etc. Then suddenly Apple's new privacy policy, the one that was described by Panos, would be less meaningful or less impactful, because I could say, okay, I will use my data and give access to whoever is willing to pay me. So firms, instead of, or let's say Meta itself or Facebook itself, instead of not having access to that data, could simply ask me, hey, would you give me access to your data that you are anyhow collecting? And then capitalize on that, helping. It's a possible scenario. We will see what happens.
Thank you very much, Jose. And let's move now to Marta.
Thank you so much, and thank you for really interesting previous statements. What I wanted to start was to refer back to the title of our panel today, Unpacking the Inner Workings of a Platform, How Do Algorithms and Data Shape Competition Among Participants? And that title really inspired me to think about algorithms and data and zoom in onto this aspect. And I wanted to start by posing this question, perhaps slightly provocative and maybe coming slightly from the left field, if you'd like. If we unpack the inner workings of a platform, what if we find that algorithms are platform participants too? And that's what I would like to start, and how I would like to provoke us to think about it today. And I'll be drawing from a study that I'm currently doing with two colleagues, with Mareike Mollman and Karsten Sorensen. And we investigate Uber as a matchmaking platform in this study. And specifically, empirically, we study Uber's patents to see exactly how algorithms work with other platform participants and how they exchange and how they use data to facilitate this working together. So we approach this topic by looking at how humans and algorithms can work together within a platform context to accomplish a goal, to complete a successful trip. And we're looking at many humans, many riders, many drivers, other human participants involved as well as many algorithms who are delegating the completion of the task to each other. And here we're drawing from the theoretical framework of delegations by Bird and Barupeng's paper in MISQ 2011. So we're looking at a delegation as a way that humans and algorithms work together by sharing tasks within a platform context. So the perspective for today's panel is, what if we look at algorithms at platform participants and not just an algorithm or the algorithm as that cog or that black box machinery that steers what's happening on the platform. And I wanted to share a couple of examples to give a little bit more background to this and look at it a little bit more in detail. So let me just share my screen to show you a couple of examples. So if we look at it from this perspective, what you can see in here on the screen are some images taken from the patents that we're analyzing. And what I first wanted to draw your attention is figure 1 that you can see on the screen that really shows us this complexity of what's happening inside a platform. And in here you can see the tiny mobiles in the top right corner of the figure are the devices of the users. The cars are the drivers, and then you can see the complex machinery of the sets of algorithms that are involved in here in a very simple task of matching the requesting users with the available drivers. So within the frame of the transportation system, you can see how many different complex elements there are. And you can see, for example, the selection engine or ride management engine or mapping engines. These are labels that hide the complexity of many more algorithms stuck on top of each other and working together. So if we start looking at what's happening within a platform from this perspective, and we start thinking about algorithms as platform participants as well, using that framework of delegation, we can see that some of the tasks that happen on a platform require, for example, selecting and matching not only the drivers and riders, but also the right algorithm to the task at hand. And on the right-hand screen, you can see a very complex workflow that's also taken from a specific patent, Uber patent, that describes what happens when there is a mass egress event. So that means when you, for example, go to a concert or to a sporting event, and how Facebook then matches all the riders with the drivers. And that's a very different context from what Uber calls, they refer it to as the standard matching process. And in here we have a very dynamic event where one of the algorithms as part of Uber needs to decide whether the request that's coming in for a ride is a standard request where you'll just be matched with a driver, or whether this is a mass egress event. And what happens in here is that the right algorithm needs to be selected dynamically depending on a situation. So then we have an algorithm or a set of algorithms that follows the standard matching workflow, or the set of algorithms that you can see here on the screen that will be launched if it's a mass egress event. So we are looking here at matching the right algorithm to the right situation and the right task, not only matching the drivers and the riders. And what we can see in here is also the complexity of this matching and how an algorithm needs to delegate to other algorithms. So using the theoretical language, how information systems agents, autonomous information system agents like the algorithm in this case, need to delegate, subdivide the task and delegate to other information systems or IS agents to be able to complete this task. What we can also see in this scenario is that when we start looking at algorithms as participants, they also need to cooperate to be able to complete a task. So in here, they will be subdividing a task at hand so that they can work together to complete this task. And what you can see in here is a specific zooming in on a different patent that we analyzed that is all about driver profiling. So what you can see on the left is an actual workflow of a set of algorithms that work together to create a profile of a driver. And we can see how the algorithms in here have to subdivide that task, and you can see that they start by accumulating the trip data from all the drivers that there are on the platform, and then they analyze trip data of a single trip to identify driving style of a driver. And what goes into this is what characterizes normal driving for the driver, aggressive driving, what is the service type, what road they are driving, what's the city, and zooming in even more specifically, how normal driving is defined is further subdivided and taken care of separate algorithms that then collect and process data that describes this normal driving. For example, looking at, and you can see on the right, vehicle speed for the driver relative to speed limit, a braking characteristic or tendency of the driver, so how fast they drive and for how fast they brake and for how long, and how fast they accelerate and for how long. So all of these are taken care of by different algorithms that work together to be able to put together that trip data for a driver, and then make a determination of a particular driver's style and check whether that in that particular trip, that style matches the driver's pattern of behavior. And if it doesn't, then the algorithms can take a remedial action. For example, terminating the driver's account or alerting to a potential accident. So here we can see how algorithms break the task down to cooperate and how they delegate between themselves so that they can successfully complete a task. And finally, the final perspective that I wanted to look at is how algorithms can compete with each other. And I think that's where things get increasingly more interesting for us when we move into competition. So something that we discovered from the patents looking at this is how very often a patent is developed to deploy intellectual property around an algorithm or a set of algorithms that improves on an older version. So in here we have a prior algorithm that was, for example, responsible for the matching or for collecting the data, but a newer and better algorithm is developed and replaces the deprecating previous version of the algorithm. And that can happen, for example, because of the speed of calculations or accuracy of solutions of the new set of algorithms that are proposed. So this gives us an insight into how algorithms compete between the different versions, and we see that as the versions of the patents get updated. But we also see that algorithms are often deployed to compete with each other for the best solution. For example, in here, when we look at identifying, these are examples about user profiling. So how different algorithms are deployed to create the best possible profile of a user, and then the outcomes of these algorithms compete for which one is going to be used as the one defining user state. So to bring it all together and to summarize what I wanted to say in here is what we see when we start looking at algorithms as participants is that we see that dynamic network of passengers, drivers, other humans, and algorithms interacting to complete tasks and to achieve desired outcomes by delegating tasks between each other. And within a platform context, we can see that human agents may delegate to other human agents or to IS agents, but then we can also see these IS agents, so in our case, algorithms, delegating to humans as well as to other IS agents. And from this perspective, data then becomes the medium of this interaction. And I would be very interested to discuss further and hear about when we look at data as this fuel that keeps the humans and algorithms working together, whether we still can look at data as something that can be exchanged or can be sold within, for example, these data markets that we were talking about. And I'm very also curious to see whether we can still talk about competition between market participants, between platform participants, if we take this perspective. So that's what I wanted to bring to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Marta. Actually, I think it's a very interesting approach to see algorithms as participants. And I must admit that similar to your last question, I wanted to ask you whether, if I see it from a philosophical and positive side, I would say that finally we see the invisible hand in practice. We have a combination of algorithms that they do magic and they can create a nice competitive environment. But if I see it from a less philosophical and maybe more realistic view, let's assume that there is a problem, so that a regulator sees that there is a problem with the welfare of the participants, the human participants of this platform, and suggest a change. How possible would that be that a senior manager from Uber can go and change this environment the way that you just described it?
I think that's a very important question that we need to ask ourselves. And I think that what emerges for me from this study is that the complexity of interlinked algorithms and the depth that they go into for even the simplest of tasks makes it very difficult for a manager or for a regulator to be able to meaningfully change how the elements of the platform work because of the interlinking and interdependencies, as well as the sheer complexity behind how these algorithms work. So if a business manager decided that there is a change around business rules, that would require a lot of technological reworking. And we would see a lot of cascading effects because of how closely these algorithms work together. And I think that it's essential for me to see data as what links all of these platform participants. And I think that's why it's so important to think about the role that changing an algorithm or trying to change some business rules would impact how data flows between participants as well.
Thank you very much, Marta. And that brings us to Christina, that she will enlighten us a little bit about data or more.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you. Well, I'm not sure enlightening, but I will build on what has been said so far, many interesting things. And I will complement something, surely focusing on data, and perhaps contradict or discuss some other thing. So this may help us all then most probably transiting into the last part or in the second part of the talk, where we will have a more interactive conversation and open questions. So the way I have thought about today was to focus more on exploring the relationship between data and value. I think this is at the basis of competition, or the idea of competition we have when we think about the digital economy, platforms, platform ecosystem. But this idea that links data and value, how it has been working so far, it has been mostly sort of hidden and taken for granted as a direct or very simple link. For instance, the big assumption that we hear over and over that, you know, there is this kind of more data, more value assumption to everything, almost everything we say, and the way we treat notion of data. So for instance, more data, better decision, quantity, discussion, you know, we need more data if we want to improve the value. More data because more data will lead to better AI system, better optimization, better platform response. We have also heard more data would lead to better services, where services are intended as mostly data-based or data-derived. We have heard also recently more data will lead to more network effect. So there are all of these kind of connected issues. Why connected? Because they are all linked to this simple, straightforward line that unites data to value. I would like to debunk this simplistic notion, going a little bit back to uncovering the assumption which drives this notion and then building on it. So offering some sort of complementing notion, why only this doesn't work and why it needs to be complemented with other ways of looking and thinking about data. So the main assumption driving this equation is that data are economic resources or factors of production. They are looked as economic resources, which may be not rival, not depletable, which may be expensive to produce but cheap to reproduce. Therefore, data flow is what enable, innovation. This is very problematic, not only because data are not just, so they are, of course, economic resources, but not just economic resources, but also because the way in which they are defined as economic resources is like a classic framework of use value and exchange value. So data are economic resources insofar as they can be used. That is very simplistic. So this is also very much in line to thinking of data as, input to processes. The two things go together. The input to process go together to say data are kind of empty buckets. They do not have intrinsic value. They will have value only insofar as we feed the machine or insofar as we feed the kind of business machine. So the two things are very much equivalent and go hand in hand. Now, these two ways that have formed the bulk of all of our understanding around data and competition related to how data can bring value, it forgets sort of to acknowledge that before they can be used, before they can be flowing into the market, before they can be fed into machine, data have to be produced. That is paramount. So production of data is still a very expensive, not just in terms of cost, of course, but also in terms of organizational resources, technological resources, cognition-based resources. So data needs to be produced first, and then, of course, we can talk about using data, exchanging data, building market for data. If we forget the production of data, we will not have any consumption. So let me then suggesting another way to complement this first, which is to look at data as artifact of cognition and knowledge, because they portray reality in certain ways and because they help building knowledge on the way they portray reality and as medium of interaction and communication. Much of what I've been working in the last 10 years together with Yannis Kallinikos has been around kind of building up evidence on this definition of data and theorizing data as both medium of exchange, medium of interaction, and artifact of cognition and knowledge. If we look at this, so if we look at how data are produced, why artifacts? So let me go just onto this little word and explore it a little bit more. Artifact, because not only they are produced, but they are produced by communities or arrangement of provisions and use. That is platforms. They are not produced in a vacuum. They are produced in an environment which is structured in certain ways, with certain kind of design, with certain cultural and organizational predilection. Their value can decline over time. Data can be fallible, so they can be wrong, they can decay, their value can cease to be valuable at all. So they have a kind of life that we will not see if we don't look at this production, but also at this interlocking between communities of production, let's call it, stakeholders involved in the production and communities of use, all the actors and stakeholders involved in their use. Now, platforms are interesting because they are the interlocking of these two communities in ways that is very difficult to cut and disentangle. So you cannot have producer on one side, and consumer on the other side, like you had in previous kind of form or organizational or arrangement. So the competitiveness of platform derives from this. So from the fact that rather than using only market mechanism to orchestrate participation and distribute value or extract value from data, they also are firms. So they are business that are owned and they are involved massively in the production of data. So they are creating the condition, the infrastructural condition, technological, but also organizational condition. Don't forget, what Marta said it was amazing because she showed the complexity of the technology underlying it. But behind there is a matching organizational complexity, which is staggering and is made of decision about what technology to use, which manager should I hire, which engineer should I pay more, which kind of contingency should I address in order to implement these or these other algorithm, whatever. I want to say that behind the technological complexity, together with the technological complexity, there is also a matching organizational complexity. I want to conclude, Joanna, I don't know if I have still 1 minute. Yeah, to say, so what? So what happens when we consider data not just as resources, but also as artifact, meaning not only as an input to process, but also as the output of processes, as the output dynamic, so let's not say of course fixed, but as this dynamic thing that come out from processes that we need to understand more in order to understand then how to use or to distribute value better or more efficiently, and so on and so forth. So we understand and then data have value. So it's not just that their value relates to their use. It's not just that their value relates to the feeding the algorithm or the machine, or in practice, it doesn't come also from this, but it comes also from something that is the way in which data are made. So what data, not what data represent, but how. So the entities that interact with algorithm arguably are data, the data representation of drivers, not the drivers themselves. So for instance, in what Marta, what you have presented, I read sensor data, GPS, timestamp location point of GPS, and accelerometer data, just to construct, the profile of drivers that will interact with the algorithm, not the driver themselves. Arguably, there is no driver outside the system of Uber, as there is no user outside the system of Facebook or whatever other platform, because the user is constructed out of its interaction with other user or with other object, and then get fed into the system, and which you would not have at all if they weren't for this interaction and how they are created by the platform itself. So understanding data as artifact, understanding data as how they are produced by the whole, let me say, interlocking of community of provision and community of use, how they are kind of interlocked together, and understanding that the sort of center of these are these interactions, are how they are staged by the platform, and the fact that therefore this gives to data their value, the modality by which interaction are staged, designed, happened, and feed data. If we look at this thing, I think we can better most probably talk about then how to disentangle this complexity in order to share or not share data, in order to kind of foster opening or protecting. Which stakeholder we need to protect first? The end user, the business, the small business enterprises that Panos mentioned. How can we cut this kind of interaction when they happened among all of these stakeholders and creates this data that fuel all the other operation? I guess that I too have more questions than answer on this, but I hope this will provide a little bit of terrain for discussion and perhaps even more questions. So thank you so much. I finish here.
Thank you so much, Christina. Actually, it's a very interesting and enlightening indeed presentation of how data are made, but it makes me a little bit scared when I hear you, because I have this feeling that somehow even the question about how competition is shaped among participants becomes less meaningful, because it's difficult to talk about competition in this context, right? We don't even have clear actors anymore. We have representations of actors, if I hear you well, that maybe they are not even competing, they are interacting. So maybe the word competition has to change. Am I right here, or is this what you're trying to say?
You are very right, Joanna. I'm very happy that the message went through, because this is exactly what I wanted to say. And the notion of ecosystem has, and the fact that it's so much discussed, not only by academics, but by regulators in this moment, by professionals, it tries, I think, to capture some of this shift. The truth is that we cannot look at novel stuff like data-fueled economies, data-fueled enterprises, data-fueled markets. We're applying old notion of competition, old notion of markets, old notion of organization, because they do not make sense. Yes, there are actors which are sort of created within the system by their own interaction, which is clustered in representation, data representation. These actors can be at the same time competitors and collaborators. That's the spirit, that's what the definition of ecosystem captures. And that's what's going on right now in the majority of this system. So you are totally right, and these are all open questions. I guess from my part, what is important is not to apply to all categories when we sort of talk about this stuff. There are continuities. Not everything is not new. There are many continuities, but there are also many novelties. And particularly by looking at data, we should make the effort of capturing this novelty rather than imposing, the old label into data. So data are not potatoes. They cannot be exchanged without or cannot survive in a market with kind of old conceptual sort of ideas.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. And I think now it's time to hear some questions and hopefully get your insights. from our participants, Ms. Alexei.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, this was. Thank you for all the speakers. Kind of very interesting statements. My question was for Panos on his discussion of how platforms deal with our data. And I wanted to ask because there seems to be kind of the platforms seem to go two different directions, like, but they, to whatever direction they go, they face a sort of legitimation, a crisis of legitimacy. Either they hand our data to third parties like advertisers that then in some ways often end up misusing our data, or what, for instance, Robert Gregory and some others have said that like the platforms kind of go to the direction of data monopolies, like hoarding and keeping all the data to themselves for the sake of privacy, while then also kind of gaining a total control of the value capture from the data. So my question to Panos is that, is there a way that traditional platforms and platforms driving this kind of traditional business model, can they solve this legitimacy crisis? Can they legitimize themselves, or are they somehow bound to become seen as illegitimate data hoarders or kind of so basically ultimately it is this kind of platform business model sustainable, or is it bound, does it have to evolve into something else to be seen as legitimate?
Yeah, so I will answer the question on the basis of innovation. I think it's not an either or, right? There are conditions of innovation. And what you are saying is essentially, you know, whoever has the data, do they have exclusive control over the data? And if so, then do they, you know, outcompete those that do not have access to the data? Usually it's the platform owner, but very often we will see that, or there have been cases where, you know, it's third-party developers that have the exclusive access. And this goes with algorithms, right? Just to make the point about algorithms. So, you know, if Amazon has access to data about transactions that are taking place on its marketplace, and then uses that data to copycat, right? And to replace existing transactions with competing products, then obviously, you know, that's market concentration, that's antitrust, that, you know, that's unlawful and needs to be regulated, right? And this has been said all over again. But obviously, without the interaction between the two, the platform owner and the third parties, there's no platform model, period, right? So if we want to have a platform model where, you know, there is scale, there is complementary innovation taking place, we need to acknowledge that the two need to both exist, right? So that's why I'm saying there need to be conditions of innovation. That's something that Christina and Carmelo and others have been, you know, we have been working on, that there are conditions of innovation. And if that innovation is constrained by means of exclusive access and to the data and to the algorithms, then that's problematic. But in other cases where, you know, the platform owner interacts with the third parties to complement, right, and to create either substitute services or additional services to the existing interactions, or even completely new interactions, then that's a case where we think it should continue to take place. So in other words, they should share data between them, and they should share how algorithms are operationalized. But if one of them has exclusive control, that's problematic. So that's how I would answer. I mean, in terms of legitimation, legitimation processes, I think, would go into sociological analysis that I don't think we have the space to discuss here, because then, you know, what do you mean by legitimacy? Legitimacy according to whom, and so on, right? That's a big question. So I answered the question in terms of innovation, if that's okay. but I'll leave it open for others to also respond to that.
One thing that came to my mind as I was listening both to the question and to the answer was, coming from my perspective, thinking about algorithms, to what extent we can talk about sharing data without sharing the algorithms as well? Because if we look at data also from what the perspective that Christina presented as how data is produced, then to what extent sharing just data as tokens with another organization without sharing the complexity of the mechanism that's involved in producing it, to what extent we can just pick up data as the outputs, the tokens, and move it to a different to a different organization, to a different company, without bringing the machinery that is involved in the production. So that's what I was thinking about in terms of that question of sharing data between parties, between organizations.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Joanna, perhaps I can
just, of course,
do a very brief comment. I think both answers are absolutely. So I will add basically to what Panos and Marta has said, and reply that indeed platforms are evolving quite rapidly. So I think that we should also see that things are changing quite a bit. They are not monolith, and even if the big five or the tremendous five or whatever, they have gained quite a bit of sort of monopoly or market power, I think also they are moving quite fast. And if you look at what has happened in the last 10 years or 20 years in some cases, you also can see that this is a moving target. So thinking about a platform business model, I want to say, or a traditional platform, it's also a moving target. What we are learning by observing this platform is that they are very dynamic. And as they continue to evolve around data and technology evolves and form of organization and collaboration and competition evolve, also these beasts, so to say, evolve quite a bit. So I think we should also kind of be open and see what's going on right now. So I also don't see it either or, but I see it. Many of these platforms will evolve in that one direction and may probably die or may probably be stopped, but other will evolve in other direction. And, depending on which direction they will take, they will be legitimate in the eye of the public or even in the eye of the regulator, and other instead not. So, but I think that the game is more open than we think. And we are seeing it with, Elon Musk and Twitter, Facebook, we are seeing that there is much, going on right now. So just wanted to add this dimension, a little bit of a more optimistic and more, open gaze to the problem.
Okay, I would like to move then to Christopher.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks. I'm Christophe from Bruegel. I'm working on competition and digital policy. I have a first question to Panos. So you assume that the concentration as the advertising market as it is today, but the advertising market as it is today is a kind of non-privacy friendly market, and we see right now that is moving to a more privacy friendly market, which innovations from Apple or from Google, but also other small players. And I'm just wondering, in this news market that is coming, whether you like it or not, whether we can see first innovation from big players, but also from small players, and whether the concentration that you describe is inevitable or not. First question. The second question is to Christina. I like your intervention because you challenge the things about more data means more values, and so mean more market power at the end of the day. by the channel about data as productions, but I still don't understand to what extent what you describe challenge the assumptions that more data is not necessary for AI applications or for market power or network effect and so on, all the things that you described at the beginning. So that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so I think thank you for your question. I think the point about synthetic data is interesting, right? And you know, this is artificial data produced to train machine learning models. And obviously there's a lot of different players that do that. But then of course you need to make the model work in real world situations, right? And very often the two won't align very well. But irrespective of the technicalities behind that, I think market concentration applies to that as well, right? Because whoever produces that data and has access to that data, if that access is exclusive, then they can develop the algorithms and they can develop the products that would serve different customer segments. So my argument applies, I think, in this case, in this situation as well, in terms of innovation. Who has exclusive control over those algorithms and the data to make the algorithms work? I agree with what Martha said earlier, that obviously you have an algorithm, you have to make it work. The two don't always work by definition or by default, right? You need to train the data, test the data, filter it, you know, code it, etc. Before it is in a workable state that would produce predictions or whatever classifications, whatever the algorithm is trying to do, that would allow you to use it in a particular product or service. But I would think that, you know, companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, right? They have machine learning models on demand, right? As a software as a service. And you know, they are developing, again, tools. They're playing this dual role that platforms are being accused of, right? They develop their own products, but at the same time, they also allow third parties to develop similar types of products on their platform. So they're both a provider of services and a competitor with those providers, right? So what I'm saying is that in terms of innovation, when there's exclusive control about the data that is being produced on the interactions between either business users or end users, right? And those third parties by the platform, that exclusive control, right, could in fact lead to anti-competitive behavior if they're using that data, that knowledge, to replace existing interactions, right? But if they are adding to that, if they're complementing that, whether with completely new interactions or supplementing or complementing the existing ones, then I would say that will generate more innovation, right? So, and also to your point that you had in your chat, I think privacy is an excuse for more market concentration. That's the argument that I'm making. Now, whether we have privacy based markets or non-privacy based markets, I think that's a big question, because I think privacy is relative, right? If you opt in to having your users being collected, you make a choice at that point in time as to whether your data is being used in particular purposes, right? So I think privacy is a relative term, but how privacy is used to concentrate power and what that means in terms of innovation is what I'm saying. So it's a slightly more nuanced argument than, you know, privacy is bad, market concentration is bad, right? I'm making the argument that there is a fine line between how we are making those arguments to make platform design choices and then using those design choices to innovate on the platform in competitive or anti-competitive terms. Christina, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Panos. So, yeah, Christoph, you asked two questions. The first was, how what I say was related to value, a different conception of value that kind of contradicted the more data, more value. And the second question was about market power. So how this relates to market power. I will answer the first with an example. The example of TripAdvisor. So TripAdvisor is a company that I studied. I published a paper on the Journal of Information Technology on it. So you can also check it for kind of more comprehensive explanation. But let me reply very quickly to your question. TripAdvisor would have not been able to create value for its customer and user, for its small and medium enterprises, for its stakeholder, if we had only accumulated more data. No. What TripAdvisor did along these 20 years of evolution, that's what we study, is that he created several kinds of interaction through which he generated different kinds of data that attracted different kind of participation that, as I was saying before, interlocked to form different services and providing different services to user, therefore increasing the value of the platform, the value of its offering for its user and for the other participant. So in this case, value has been created not by more data. It wouldn't have, led anywhere, but by creating these different interactions, or producing different kind of data that together, long story short, have created the condition for different participation, more interlocking, and therefore product and service innovation, therefore value. The second part of your question about market power. Any definition of market power, any definition of market would not fit anything we are looking at right now. What kind of market Facebook is in? What kind of market TripAdvisor is in? How would you define market power under the classical definition of market power? I'm not saying that they don't have power. I'm just saying that the classical definition of market power do not fit here. And that's the spirit of my discussion. The spirit is we need to understand how, power is created under different conditions, market function differently, and concentration may function differently. Because there is no, selling and buying, and price competition here. Jose said it very clearly. It's very difficult to put a price on data. Also, the majority of these companies are not in the business of selling data. They are in the business of producing data. So I guess then, therefore, my talk is very much against, this kind of, and it is demonstrated by the difficulties of applying this label into current example of digital economy. From the top player to the small player, we need to look at the digital economy, not just at the same old stuff here, which is also very important if we want to operate, and create the condition for a flourishing digital economy. We are not, of course, regulating companies. We try to establish the condition for the digital economy to flourish. So I hope I answered to your questions.
Thank you, Christina. I think that we will have a space for one more question and maybe reflections from many of you. Carmelo has a question I see here.
Okay, fine. Thanks. Great conversation, and I cannot, stay out of this. I felt, the impetus to jump in. Here's the bomb for you. Too much of the rosy picture on value creation. Okay, so let me take the critical hat of the regulators and say, yeah, but so what, right? There is a lot of value being created, and but what about, the concentration, right, of the source of this value? So meaning that all this value is emanating from, very few entities. And that's the first concern, right? I mean, that everybody seems to have, right? So they seems to have a problem with this, which is frankly, I would say curious because, if you take the economics, they never consider these aspects, right? As long as this is efficient, right? But anyhow, the second aspect is the distribution of this value, right? I mean, so how it gets distributed, and whether, and who stands to win from this? Who stands to benefit from the value? Who stands to benefit from the additional, for instance, interactions that get unlocked, right? Through data aggregation, for instance, or through, the algorithm working in a specific direction rather than others, right? I mean, so who are the winners, who are the losers? Because it seems that, at the end of the day, it's really this, the topic, right? I mean, so who gets excluded, so to speak, from those efficiencies, and who gets included in those efficiencies, and therefore, who stands to lose from this type of, algorithm-based competition, algorithm-based innovation, or data aggregation, innovation, and so on and so forth. So that's the overarching question that I have. To ground, your answer, maybe, let me give you two very specific, instantiation of the problem: data silos and platform envelopment. This seems to be two two opposite or two extremes, if you want, of the same problem, right? So it seems again that there's a lot of rejections against platforms expanding into new areas, right? While we kind of understand from research, management, and many of the things you have said, that that's actually could be good because of the data aggregation and data ability to generate more value, right? But there seems to be a rejection against this because they don't want platforms to become even bigger and bigger. And so the answer is data silos. Let's focus, let's constrain platforms to some specific domains. And so it seems that we're going back to a world where we have verticals instead of the breaking of of these old boundaries. So it seems that boundaries needs to become or come back. So what is your view on this? I mean, are we going in the wrong directions? Are we going back to the Jurassic economy instead of moving forward?
And before you answer, let me say that we have a limited time, so keep it short. Maybe each of you could reflect on it. And yeah, who would like to start first?
Maybe I can start, since I didn't participate much in the second part. So you've spoken about regulators, right? And this idea of, okay, let's go back, or maybe an assumption, let's go back to silos, because then we're going to somehow constrain the activity and the eventual power of those platforms. And this made me think about one of these notions that we were discussing before, the one about federated learning. With federated learning, what is actually possible is that individuals become the silo per se. So instead of seeing silos as verticals of activity of a collection of individuals, it could be, or it definitely is technically possible to see, conceptually possible to see individuals as the silos. I would be the silo of myself, owning data in my smartphone, repository, cloud, whatever, about whatever I do in the digital realm. So this might be something to add there. The question is if technology is going to be accepted in a way that is fast enough in order to, let's say, match the demands of the needs of regulators. And maybe in this question, because I found all the interventions very interesting, but the one from Christina, because it's maybe the more challenging one and probably the most enriching for me, at least, right? And maybe one comment there, the whole view of thinking traditionally about data in economics terms as an input, etc., it also leaves a lot of freedom to model data in innovative ways. There are examples of modeling data as value in an S shape, for example, which would definitely resonate with your idea that more data does not necessarily bring more value, right? So the efficiency of an algorithm is capped at 100%. So at some point, when the efficiency is 100%, that's it, right? And maybe something to build or to build a bridge between these two views, and I'm eager to read your papers and to get more on your view, right? But maybe a bridge between these two views would be to think, okay, what is present, what is value? Maybe we're mixing things here, and eventually thinking in those terms would help us to have a more cohesive view of the whole topic we're discussing. That's
okay.
my today.
I have to apply a little bit of brute force here. We don't have a lot of time. If somebody needs to say something, please do so, but it has to be really short.
So I just wanted to say a really quick thing about data silos. And I think that what I've seen from my study is that it would be extremely difficult, if not incapacitating, to implement this in practice. Because if we think even about a simple Uber algorithm to be able to decide whether we're dealing with a mass event, the kind of data that this algorithm needs ranges from what's the weather outside right there to past historical data up until 10 years ago in the same place, to how fast people are opening up the apps on their phones, to calendars of events and sporting venues and so on. So the range of data that's needed to actually make this machinery work, if we try to put a silo around it and some kind of boundaries, that may incapacitate the whole enterprise of trying to use any of this data. So that's what I needed to say at this point. Thank you.
Panos, shall I go for a remark, or would you like to go?
Yes.
Let me give you the word. Come on, let me do the gentleman.
Quick, Panos.
yeah. We're running out of time. No, that's interesting. And if I can just return just with I guess, be as provocative as Carmelo has been with data silos versus data envelopment. I think Elon Musk is probably going to do both. I think his idea of free speech, I think he's going to allow echo chambers and polarization to take place, because that's going to drive traffic up. So in a way, there's data silos because there's going to be different groups talking about, their own topics. But at the same time, he's capturing a lot of data, so he's data enveloping. I think when you have a situation like that, where a company becomes private, like the platform becomes private, then you have this problem of both, I would say. And I will leave it there for Christina to comment.
Short, Christina?
Very short. So undeniably, we have a problem. I mean, that's under the eyes of everybody. That's no escape. The point is, we need to find new solution, not old solution. Otherwise, yes, we will go back to Jurassic economy. I like that. Data silos will not work, but not even openness will work. It has been demonstrated. The two are two extremes that do not fit. They are not like one size fits all. They will not fit everything. We need to find ways of looking and studying, analyzing this kind of new economic arrangement, their evolution, their dynamicity, which is nothing as we have seen so far, particularly when it's data-driven. And only at this point, we can effectively say, okay, then how do we redistribute that? Silos will not work, I repeat, will not work, not even openness at all costs. This has been, it has been empirically sort of demonstrated. So we need to find new ways, new solution, and avoiding perhaps applying, sort of top-down solution coming from the 1920 or the 1929 or whatever. Let's find something which fits our own digital and data age.
Before we close, I would like to remind you all that the purpose of this panel was to provoke a little bit the classical thinking. And I think we succeeded on that. At least that's my feeling. I hope that you all have some new ideas to take with you home and reconsider when you think about competition in the platforms, and whether you think about platforms or ecosystems. Thank you very much all for your wonderful input and your questions. And I look forward to the future events. Thank you, guys.